สืบเนื่องจากผู้พิการทางสายตาคณะหนึ่งจำนวน5 คนประกอบด้วย 1. อาจารย์วีระแมนนิยมพล 2. อาจารย์โกมลมาลัยทอง 3. อาจารย์วินิตมูลวิชา 4. อาจารย์ธนาพันธ์เขาสิม 5. มิสเรซ่าเจ้าหน้าที่ฝ่ายต่างประเทศมูลนิธิธรรมิกชนเพื่อคนตาบอดในประเทศไทยในพระบรมราชูปถัมภ์ได้เดินทางไปประชุมสภาการศึกษาคนตาบอดโลกณเมืองโอรันโดมลรัฐฟลอริดาประเทศสหรัฐอเมริกาในระหว่างวันที่ 22-25 สิงหาคม 2559 ภายหลังจากนั้นได้ไปเยือนเมืองซัฟฟอร์ดมลรัฐเวอร์จิเนียซึ่งเป็นเมืองที่อาจารย์เจนีวิฟคอลฟิลด์ได้ถือกำเนิดขึ้นณโอกาสนี้ได้รับการประสานงานจากนักจิตวิทยาซึ่งเป็นผู้พิการทางสายตาประจำองค์กรคนตาบอดแห่งมลรัฐเพนซิลเวเนียให้ความกรุณาค้นคว้าจัดหาหลักฐานสำคัญซึ่งเป็นสุนทรพจน์ของอาจารย์เจนีวิฟคอลฟิลด์ได้แสดงเนื่องในโอกาสที่ได้รับรางวัลสิทธิเสรีภาพจากประธานาธิบดีลินดอนบีจอนสันแห่งประเทศสหรัฐอเมริกาเมื่อปีพุทธศักราช 2506 ตรงกับปีคริสตศักราช 1963 ดังนั้นซีดีสารานุสรณ์ฉบับนี้จึงขอนำเสนอบทสุนทรพจน์ของอาจารย์เจนีวิฟคอลฟิลด์เพื่อเป็นที่ระลึกและเพื่อความเป็นสิริมงคลแก่ศิษยานุศิษย์ของอาจารย์เจนีวิฟคอลฟิลด์และผู้พิการทางสายตาทั้งหลายซึ่งเป็นเสียงการแสดงสุนทรพจน์ของอาจารย์เจนีวิฟคอลฟิลด์เป็นภาษาอังกฤษและแปลเป็นภาษาไทยโดยนายเอกมลแพทยานันท์นายกสมาคมบัณฑิตตาบอดไทยและเลขานุการคณะกรรมการสมาคมคนตาบอดแห่งประเทศไทยสาขากรุงเทพมหานครสุนทรพจน์ของอาจารย์เจนีวิฟคอลฟิลด์เนื่องในโอกาสได้รับรางวัล Presidential Gold Medal of Freedom
It's a very great pleasure for me to introduce Miss Caulfield, Miss Genevieve Caulfield to the members of the Overseas Press Club and also to the audience of WNYC who will be listening to the remarks that are made here at the luncheon as they do each Wednesday. Miss Caulfield, especially with so many of her friends here present, needs no introduction. All of us remember that on the 4th of July a year ago, when President Kennedy decided that for the first time in American history, the Presidential Gold Medal of Freedom should be given to a group of 3 women, along with a group of men, that in this group of the first 3 women ever to win the award was Miss Caulfield, recognizing a story which already had been recognized by the Ramon Magsaysay Award for International Understanding, which is called some people call it the Nobel Prize of Asia. That award had been given to her in 1961. In many ways, sometimes through the pages of her own autobiography, often in recognitions from organizations, the admiration and appreciation of the whole human race has been expressed to Miss Caulfield, blind almost from infancy, a woman who converted this handicap into a blessing, an unknown blessing for Southeast Asia. For after going out to Japan for 15 years to support herself by teaching, making use of her Columbia Teachers College degree and by teaching English to high school boys in Japan, she then went on to Southeast Asia to help the blind in that area, very often working with people who never before had been given any assistance. Ms. Caulfield was telling me just now with her typical delightful sense of humor that she always remembers those days of teaching English in Japan. Reporters are always saying that she was working with the blind during those 15 years, from 1923 to 1939, confusing the latter part of her story with the first part. She was not. She was teaching English, and she said that she'd always worked very well for 2 reasons. One, because of the great brilliance of those students that she found in Japan, and also because of a little speech she always gave on the first day of class, which was that I know that it's fun to deceive the teacher, to play games with the teacher. All of us love to do that. I like it too. But really you mustn't do it in my case. It would be too easy. She told me also of one little boy who she was giving a pronunciation test one day, and she said to one little boy, "Don't sharpen that pencil now. We don't need pencils at this point. This is just an oral exercise." And after class he came up and he said, "Could you see me sharpening that pencil?" This is a little hint of the depth of grandeur of the guest we have the honor to have with us today, Ms. Caulfield.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I've done many presumptuous things in my life, but I think this is about the limit of my presumption, to dare to address the Overseas Press Club on a subject that they must know so much better than I do, that I am really overwhelmed with a sense of modesty, which is not my usual fault. I couldn't be. But at any rate, perhaps I may be able to say a few things to you that you don't know about, or perhaps you've forgotten. They happened so long ago. I'm going to speak today principally about it'll have to be very quick, but the political and social aspects of Thailand, and a little on the same subject of Vietnam. Those are the countries in which I worked. I am particularly interested at this time about the social development in Thailand because recently we have heard about the death of the Prime Minister Pibun Somgram. Now, we've almost forgotten him because in the meantime, before he died, Sarit Thanarat died, and we have another prime minister. But I can never forget Pibun Somgram because when I went to Thailand in 1939, some of you may know this, but perhaps some of you don't. There was, I may say in all truth, that not one single thing was being done by the Thai for physically handicapped or orphans or any other kind of people. The only work of this type that was being done by the Thai themselves was Red Cross work and a few hospitals. That's all. The leper hospitals, orphanages, and other institutions of that kind were practically all conducted by missionaries. And when I think now how Thailand has developed, it is really amazing. Before the war and after the war, until after the war, there was no training at all of any kind of social workers in Thailand, nothing at all. The first school for the training of social workers was inaugurated by Tan Puying Layep, the wife of Pibun Somgram. And I can tell you that was an interesting thing. She asked the United Nations representative, Miss Davidson, if she would help with this school of social work, which she inaugurated in the Women's Culture Group organization. And I know that some of the people, of the students who entered that school of social work, thought they were going to learn dancing and other things like that. They thought it was a school for social training of quite a different kind. This is true. And when we think that now there are all sorts of activities in Thailand, there's work for the blind, there's work for the deaf, there's work for the cripple, for retarded children, for underprivileged children, for all sorts of things conducted by the Thai themselves, sometimes by the government, sometimes private organizations, with the members of the royal family very much interested in this matter. It is simply amazing. When I first went to help the blind in Thailand, I had been in Japan for quite a long time, and I had heard that nothing was being done for the blind in Thailand. The I asked some Thai people whom I met in Tokyo, what are you doing for the blind in Thailand? Or Siam, as they called it then. Blind? Oh, there are no blind in Siam. None. Oh, how nice. What a utopia. I think I'll go there, I would reply. And they said, well, there are no children anyway. Well, now in our school, at present time, we have 145 children. And in Chiang Mai, where there's another school open, they have nearly 30 children. And they need a great many more opportunities for blind children. I wish I could go into it and tell you how hard we had to work, how we had to do all sorts of things to convince the parents that it was worthwhile sending these children to school, and how it was so difficult to convince even the members of our board. We couldn't get any donations for our school without forming a foundation. I went there on my own entirely with the enormous sum of $800, which wouldn't go very far toward starting a school unless we got donations. But we couldn't do that unless we formed a foundation. It took 6 months to get that foundation started. Now the foundations are springing up all over the place, all over Thailand. But after we got it started, we worked for 5 years without any government help at all. And the first government help we got came through the interest of Madame Pibun and the Prime Minister. And just think at that time, you may be interested in this little episode. We were hoping that the government would give us something, but we didn't know how it would be done. One day, anyway, we were going on with our school work and doing the best we could. And one day, one of the members of our board came to me and said, you know, the Prime Minister's wife has a little group known as the Women's Culture Group. This was during the war. We all had to wear hats and gloves. Imagine hats and gloves in Thailand. But we all did. It was the law. We couldn't buy postage stamps unless we had a hat on. This is true. In the country, I'm sure some of you correspondents who have been in Thailand know this story. But in the country, they had a family hat. In the morning, the mother would wear it when she went out to market, and otherwise she couldn't buy any food. And then the father would wear it when he went to sell his products. And the children would be playing with no clothes on but wearing hats. It was really extraordinary. This was a rule of the Prime Minister. We don't know even yet why he made such a law. Perhaps he'll tell us from heaven now why he did, but we don't know. But anyway, we had to go to this meeting. The Prime Minister's wife said she had this women's culture group, and everybody wore hats and gloves, and a secretary of our committee said to her, don't you think it would be nice for the students from the School for the Blind to come and give a play for you? She'd seen how our children, how adept they were in giving plays. And the Prime Minister's wife said, blind children give plays? Are you crazy? She said, no, I'm not crazy. Let them try. So we all appeared one day in our hats and gloves, and hot as blazes it was. You can imagine in Bangkok. So we all appeared, and the blind children were all dressed up and all ready to give their plays. They gave 2 plays, one in English and one in Thai. Well, of course, for any poor little miserable so-called blind children, to be able to speak English was simply incredible. And these women were so impressed by that for the next day, the Prime Minister invited all the pupils and teachers of the School for the Blind to lunch. Such a thing had never been heard of. Well, I just tell you that to show how quick the Thai were to respond to this kind of thing. And after 5 years, through the Pibuns, we got a wonderful government grant. It was wonderful at that time, but at that time we had only 20 pupils. Now we have 144. So the government grant takes care of about 1/6 of our budget. It's a resident school. But it's not only that. It's the fact that we have won the confidence of the people. People are beginning to understand that these people who are studying in our school are learning to work. They're working as typists, as telephone operators, as masseurs in hospitals, as interpreters, as musicians, doing all sorts of things. And as a result of that, their whole concept is changing. And now, since the war, we have 2 schools for the deaf. And we also, I say we because I'm interested in the whole thing anyway, started work for the cripple. They have a beautiful organization for the rehabilitation of the cripple. And all sorts of things have been developed. Now, this shows that the political situation enabled them to work, to do this social work too, even though Thailand, as you know, has never been a democracy. They had, in the time of P. Bun, an assembly, but 50% of that assembly was elected by the people, and the other 50% appointed by the government. So the government was sure to be on top, anyway we would put it. But in spite of all that thing, it's not a democracy. Now it's under martial law, still, Thailand is. But the people are not being browbeaten. There are many difficulties, but they are able to be interested in their underprivileged people. There's so much yet to be done, good gracious. I don't mean that great strides have been taken, but I do mean that since 1939, the progress that Thailand has made is simply incredible. When you think of all the Queen, who is patroness of a great many organizations, including our own, that various members of the royal family, that the Prime Minister's wife, even the wife of Sarit Thanarat, who was not particularly interested in social work, she had to get interested in social work in order to keep her name, in order to get other things she wanted. But Marshal P. Bun's wife was really interested. I remember it was she who organized Women's Volunteer Organization. And she forced all the women who were employed by, whose husbands were employed by the government to join this organization, and made many of them go as volunteers to work in hospitals, to work in any kind of project that she had in mind. She wasn't a trained social worker, but she was dedicated to the interests of the people. So these wives of the officials would work for this kind of thing. Well, I had English pupils in Thailand. I was working for the blind as a volunteer and taught English to keep the wolf from the door. And I remember I had 1 or 2 of these government officials' wives. One day I was arranging for their lessons. I said, "Oh, tomorrow you have to go to your volunteer group, don't you?" She said, "Not volunteer, forced labor." But now it's not forced labor anymore. They understand it. If they're not volunteers on something, they're just not in it. That's all. It's a question of status these days to be members of some organization or several organizations, and they really put a lot into it. They give a lot of money. Now, our School for the Blind, we get only 1/6 of our budget from the government, and all the rest of the money comes from people in Thailand, including Jim Thompson. And Jim Thompson has, as you know, started the improved Thai silk industry, and he has given work to an enormous number of people, and also his competitors have given a lot of work to any number of people. Jim has a house into which he has put all sorts of Thai works of art, and he opens this house twice a week to tourists. For the privilege of going through this house, he charges $1.25. That $1.25 goes to our school, every bit of it. And this kind of thing people are doing. A lot of the Buddhists give us donations to get merit. We're mighty glad they believe that they can get merit that way, because they help us a lot, and they help themselves at the same time. And we have never been in debt. We've never had any trouble. Well, I wish I could go on telling you this, except that I want to say that the object of this work, as well as for the work for the deaf and other social activities, is to enable these pupils of ours to become self-respecting human beings. We've sent 9 already abroad to study. They've gone back to help in the work for the blind and to work for themselves, which is a great help, because we want them to go out and do other things. We're teaching them typing in our school. We have one girl who's working as a dictaphone typist at the United Nations office in Bangkok on the Mekong River project. It's a pretty difficult project for a Thai girl, especially a blind girl who has no dictionary, to work on in English. But Dr. Schaaf, the head of this Mekong River project, told me that she's the best typist he has, which is a great help. When I was in Thailand in December, I met her, and she's very pleased with herself. She said, Miss Caulfield, you're going to stay for the conference, aren't you? I said, what conference? She said, well, the Mekong River Conference. I said, good gracious, I couldn't care less. But this shows how interested she is. But in 1956, I was asked by the ambassador, the Vietnamese ambassador in Bangkok, who was he was a refugee from the north, and he had been sent to Thailand to look after all these refugees, who had come down during the French War. I wish I could go into that, but I have only 20 minutes, so I can't. But I wanted to give some lectures about Vietnam when I came to the United States, and I knew I couldn't do it without going there, and I didn't know a single living soul there. And naturally, what could I do wandering around Saigon in 56 looking for lecture material? So I went to the ambassador and asked him if he could help me get this material. He said, oh, yes, I think I can, but I can help them get some material, too. I want you to tell them something about the work that's being done here for the blind and other physically handicapped people. So he arranged for me to meet President Ngo Diem Diem. I met him the first day that I was in Saigon, and I always remember what he said to me. He said, he talked English. Usually he spoke French and somebody had to interpret, but for some unknown reason, he spoke English with me. And he said, I have very little money. He did in 1956. I have very little money, and you can imagine my problems are innumerable. I knew that, too. It was a shambles in 1956. But he said, I don't want the physically handicapped to be left out. I want them to feel that even though it is a very small project that we can organize for them, that they're having some share in the development of our country. So can you do something small? I said it couldn't be smaller. I started in Thailand with one pupil, and there's nothing smaller than that. So we were able to get an elementary school started in Saigon under the government to organize what is known as the Friends of the Blind of Vietnam, who are interested in the adults. Of course, all this is on a very, very small scale. And then the brothers, the Christian brothers, have recently consented to open a class of training for the blind, to train a small group of boys so that they can go into the classes with the sighted boys and study in the secondary school. So we're getting on with that very well indeed. Now, this shows in Vietnam, I want to point out here, because we hear so many horrors about Vietnam, and I, being interested in this type of work, can see how eager the people are to do something along these lines. Now, when I was there last August, in the middle of the agitation and the troubles that everybody was having under the last administration, the Minister of Education asked me if I would take the responsibility of forming a training class to teach already trained teachers to teach the blind. Oh, I said, I'd love to do it. And it can't be very big, he told me, because they don't have much money, but we can at least get a start so that we can have trained teachers to enable us to open more work, more schools. So then I came back to the United States to get the award that was mentioned, and I was just going to start prepared to stop in Vietnam on November 1st. This award was postponed and postponed, so I left on November 1st to get it. And when I had my ticket all punched to go to stop in Saigon, when on the 1st of November I heard about the coup d'etat. I was to leave on the 2nd. And I thought probably my friends in Vietnam would prefer to see me at another time, so I decided to cancel that. I called up the Thai Airways on the night of November 1st, and I said, I'm going to cancel my trip to Saigon. They said, why? Well, I said, they're having a revolution there. Oh, is that so? Well, I just heard it on the radio. You couldn't blame the Thai Airways. But they didn't really know about it. So I didn't get there until January. But I was worried to death for fear that the coup d'etat people would scrap my teacher's training, because that had been proposed by the former Minister of Education. So I got some grapevine people working and found out that they were still very much interested in it, that the minister under the first coup d'etat was interested. And they said, we're waiting for you to come. And the class had already been organized. They were learning Braille and preparing to get my instruction. So I went back in January and began the class under the first coup d'etat. Then at the end of January, we had the second coup d'etat. I thought, oh, we're finished now. Not a bit. The second Prime Minister of Education was equally interested, more so. And for that 3 months, January, February, and March, I was able to get a grant. At least I was offered a grant from USIS, USIA you call it here, which I was very happy to accept. It was the first and only grant I've ever received in all my life, and wasn't I glad to get it. But I got that. And when I left for this trip to the United States, the Minister of Education said, I hope you get another grant, but if you don't, I can get all the English pupils for you to teach that you need, including myself. And I'd be glad to get some help with English, too. He speaks excellent English, by the way. And so I'm going back in October. But I tell you this story to show you how interested people are in this kind of thing and how the Americans are working. You people, perhaps some of you realize, but many don't who just read the accounts of guerrillas, how these doctors who have been sent over with the army, when they're not working with the soldiers, they're down working in hospitals on physical therapy, ophthalmology, all sorts of things. They're not just sitting around waiting for the patients to come from the American army. They're really doing things. There are people in aid who are in remote villages, not safe places at all, working on health, education, social work, all sorts of things. And I think that this concrete idea of the work for the blind will give you an example of how interested the Vietnamese are in improving their condition. And this present government, as far as I can see, is very much interested, especially in improving the lot of the peasants. The former government did a tremendous work. My goodness, when we think of the conditions in 1956 with 900,000 refugees in camps, and most of those people now settled on their own land, contributing to the country in one way or another. They were settled down pretty well by 1959. And schools and all sorts of things. There were enough schools for the Viet Cong to burn, a good many, and enough teachers for them to take into captivity, and all sorts of things. And fortunately, this government is continuing and perhaps intensifying this work among village people. And we mustn't feel that just because perhaps the war needs to be pushed up a little, which it certainly does need to be pushed up an awful lot, we mustn't feel that we are just doing military work there. We are absolutely necessary for the people of Vietnam to help them to get their society in order, to help people to learn, to be educated, to sick people to be made well, blind people to be made useful, and prevention of all sorts of diseases and infirmities. You don't realize, I'm sure, many of you, how important that sort of thing is, because after all, as you know better than I do, these are not these people way over there. They're our neighbors. They're only 18 hours away from San Francisco. Just think of it. Just the distance that it used to take to go from New York to Chicago. They are people who belong with us. They're no longer those unknown aliens, the oriental mind which nobody can understand. A lot of nonsense. We can't understand it. We can understand very well about Oriental people because they feel as we do. They want the same things that we do. And we hope sincerely that you, people who are so interested in getting the truth to the public, we hope that you will try to make people in America understand how important it is for us to really help these people, not just hand out money, but give them our spirit, give them our work, give them our love, give them our understanding, and give me your understanding, and let me stop now.
I'll ask Irene Kuhn to handle our regular question period. Irene? Just take it from here.
Well, first question. I'm sure you're all dying to get into the very profound knowledge that Ms. Caulfield has of this part of the country, which really not too many of us know too well. I'm going to start this by asking her a personal question about a very dear colleague of mine, Father Dieger, and perhaps you tell us a word or two about Father Dieger's work, Ms. Caulfield.
I first met Father Dieger in Vietnam. He had come there at the invitation of the president to try to straighten out the difficulties with the Chinese. You perhaps remember that when the Vietnamese gained independence, they did some rather, indiscreet things about the Chinese. As you know, there's a Chinese population, a big overseas Chinese population in most of Asian countries. And in Vietnam, under the French, the Chinese were left entirely to themselves. The French tried in every way to disseminate their culture to the Vietnamese, but they didn't try to disseminate their culture at all among the Chinese. And the Chinese lived in groups in segments of the town. For instance, in Saigon, they lived in Chalern. And most of them didn't speak French and didn't speak Vietnamese. They spoke only Chinese. So when, at the time of independence, the government announced in stentorian tones that all Chinese people had to be naturalized, otherwise they couldn't do business. Well, this, of course, caused riots and all kinds of things, and it was soon discovered by the government that this had not been a very wise move. So, among other people, Father Dieger was who had spent a great many years in China. He knew Chinese well, spoken, written, and understood. And he was invited by Ngo Diem Diem, whom he had known here in this country and in Belgium and Paris, to come over and try to do something with the Chinese. Well, he has been working ever since, a remarkable person. He opened 2 schools. These 2 schools now are in charge of brothers from Taiwan. And one of them is a language school, and the other is a high school, which prepares Chinese students to enter the University of Saigon, so that they're trying to integrate these Chinese people into the life of Vietnam. And I can assure you that during all the agitations last year, the Chinese, they kept their head remarkably well. Now they're a little worried because they hear that from Hanoi, Chinese are being specially trained to come over and infiltrate among them and subvert them as much as possible. Father Dieger also conducts a press service, a news service,